Which body-freezing confession have you heard someone casually make in public? I used a cell cable, and you wouldn't believe some of the older folks who are over 70. As I was trying to suggest an internet speed for an older woman, I asked her what streaming services she used. She sighed deeply and said, "My father used to sneak into my sister's and my room. My mother advised us to be good ladies and not share our private problems with the neighbors at night." And I was just staring and thinking, so Netflix and Hulu? Most likely, some of that is due to her mental health issues and constant desire to leave. This poor woman was desperate for human interaction and had a man enter the business and spend 4 hours a day for 3 days in a row yelling. On day 3, he confessed that he was lonely because his wife was visiting his sister. So he came down there and made my day worse. I was obviously shocked, Louise. He was threatening to scare me about his debt. Did you hear anything from elderly people in general? I heard from folks that I was going to hell because I sold access to HBO and Game of Thrones. And I had a 70-year-old tell me she hoped my mom died in a fire over a $4 charge to 411. When I got switched off from Thrones, I had an elderly guy start telling me the story of how he held his childhood best friend in Nam while he bled out in hell. He threatened to kill me with a hammer because he owed $300. My grandma was born in 1918 in Germany and experienced severe bombing. The mud didn't even know that I was in the army. I was attempting to temporarily turn off his phone because he was heading to Florida for the winter. Our family rarely discussed the negative aspects of World War II. When they did, it was usually in the form of humorous tales. When I was around 9 years old, my parents and grandmother were watching a documentary on the bombings, and when the word firestorm was used, we children were intrigued. My parents began to explain how a large fire can draw so much air that it produces a powerful wind, intensifying the flames, and my grandma suddenly understood why. "I have seen people burn like torches," he replied nonchalantly, glaring at the 1,000-yard stare. We uttered, "What?" and Grandma snapped out of it and said, "What?" I suppose it had to be spoken, but she didn't even realize it when she did. When I was incarcerated, they had to clean out a cell after a man was fatally stabbed by a roommate. When the guard took Mim and another from the cell next to that, they were laughing about how the dead man sobbed and was unable to speak English, and they waited to open the doors until the assailant stopped. I can still hear it when I try to. The way a prisoner described his crime, that he had stabbed someone at a party, reminded me of my brief experience working at a correctional facility. He did it in a way that seemed like he was making a joke about the victim. I learned that many people learn early on that their life is meaningless if it is so cheap, that everyone else's is much less. He stabbed me, despite my mom's hilarious voice. One of my mom's friends is small. During lunch, a kind elderly man, who was helpful and chatty, gave me a job at the cleaning service firm, where he worked when I was 18. It was easy money, and he began talking about how he couldn't hear very well out of one ear. He then just puts out there that he was subjected to eardrum slaps and electrical torture in his native Latin American nation during a military dictatorship, until he fainted and awoke in what he believed to be a mass grave. They assumed he was dead and abandoned him, but he awoke, crawled among the corpses, and made his way home. A small, amiable elderly guy survived in a way that can hardly be accurately described by the word hell, something that would make me to a drunken wreck, and chose to bid death farewell while leading the greatest life possible. It redefined toughness for me, not the strong, muscular, alpha male types, but those who had seen the devil and are still going on having fun because they've seen him and know what an alternative might be. Could you tell us which country it was? He was an Argentinian, a cool elderly man who was popular and my sweetest buddy when I was. She casually stated how hard it was to get her dad out of her hair when she was probably around 15 years old. I inquired further and discovered that it was a recurring issue, and her mother was aware of it. So I went straight to my parents about it, and they got the correct folks. Dang, in middle school, I had a friend tell me something similar. She casually informed me that all the men in her home were mistreating her. I was appalled, so I notified my parents, and they informed the appropriate people that my dad had once admitted to me in law school that he had driven to his ex-wife's house with a gun following their divorce, and that she was doing well when my mom ran into her a few years prior. She was cheating, and my half-sister said that he was plotting a double murder. He reportedly lingered outside her house for hours before turning around. I'm sad to hear that. It makes us consider the possibilities. I hope you were at least elderly. I was 12 years old when I heard something that disturbed me, and it happened just after he and my mother had divorced on one of our visits, the ramifications of which I'm only now beginning to understand. Yasesh was in a bar once with some of his co-workers. One of the guys, who was raised quite religiously, sobbed and admitted to being gay for the first time. He probably forgot about it the next day, but I still follow him on social media. I was chatting to a guy a year after we graduated from high school, and he told me casually that he and his friend would dress up in suits and grab his dad's crown, Victoria badge, and revolver. He's still deep in the closet. Go harass Hollywood prostitutes. He said handle, but I believe he meant get free services. I saw him at the only 10-year reunion I went to. He had joined the LA Metro Police Force, but was divorcing and on his third marriage. He claimed that 3 people were suing him individually in addition to the departments, and that he didn't think he would be a police officer for very long. I didn't question him for specifics, but he told me all of this in 30 minutes. After a few seconds, he asked, "So what have you been doing?" Edit. According to a friend of mine, this man has been posing as a police officer since the 11th grade. He would also provide pimps and drug traffickers with pistols, steal drugs. I had a really dear friend who had been out of touch for about a year, touring the country, sleeping on people's sofas, camping in the desert, etc. And when he came, we all got up to hang out back then, and it essentially turned into a small party. At one point, he subtly mentions that he has a court appearance coming up and says it's because his ex is suing him for beating his. He tried to carry on with the party as if nothing had occurred after his infant daughter was almost killed some time before he departed, and I don't think I ever heard of anyone there hanging out with him again. What was he like after that? That's a very crazy thing to do. Normally, he was a really kind person, kind of hippie-ish, and very grounded, almost like Mr. Rogers, but with some tattoos and a penchant for smoking marijuana. I honestly don't think I ever saw him. He became upset, which is why learning about him was so unexpected and upsetting. He occasionally used more potent drugs, but it would still be shocking for him to go that far just because he was high. I knew. A highly detective once told me that he thought most people were dying to tell you what occurred, or what they did, as if it did them no good, but they just wanted it out, as if it were less of a burden. That statement resonated with me. Perhaps this is why I remember it. My dad once told me about one of his college friends who enjoyed doing nitrous. It was a weird turn of phrase, like burden or something they want to shed, like they just had to have it and are convinced they would feel better. Oxygen was so strong that he put a bag of it around his head and asphyxiated. He said this in jest and laughed until I pointed out that it was probably disturbing my mother's favorite joke, which wasn't one she used to tell about me, but she always desired a girl. However, my father reportedly refused to be with her because he was afraid she would die while carrying my brother. Occur once more, so she got him completely intoxicated one evening, put him to bed, and got me. She proudly recounted this story to me until I was old enough to comprehend sex and consent, and I questioned her directly about why she was pleased with gripping Dad to make me pregnant. So how did that go down? It wasn't dramatic. She got pale and attempted to explain herself by saying that he was simply afraid, and that he wanted another child, so it was all right, so I ignored it. If he had done that to you, what would that have meant? My dad found it amusing and jumped in to make fun of her, but she wouldn't acknowledge what she did or offer an apology, and even in his light-hearted manner. That was the last time the tale was told. Came up, and they had a rare, lengthy private conversation, so I assumed they worked it out. My dad never denied that he would never have had another child if my mom hadn't deceived him. So I'll never understand how, to try to conceive, she intentionally got him intoxicated. In addition, my mother gave my sister-in-law serious advice about making holes in their condoms so they may have a child that my brother didn't want. Fantastic, but by no means did it shock my family. It wasn't a direct confession, but a co-worker told me about a litigation he was involved in that caught my attention. So I looked it up on Google to see if I could find the story. Instead, I came across a story about how he had been apprehended and detained for recording children. Wow, what happened the following day? It was a strange time when the news appeared on my screen, and he passed by. Since he departed the company years later, I quickly minimized it and kept it to myself for a long time. When someone discussed bringing him back, I advised them to Google that he was a horrible co-worker as well. I had a similar situation with a customer at work, where his father called on his behalf because his son was in jail, and the local police were always trying to get him. I conducted some snooping and discovered that the son's counterclaim was that the police officers improperly carried out the search warrant after obtaining the PC. Since they did so late, even if the warrant was for distributing a large amount of CP, he was arrested for doing so. The officer got it late, but he didn't dispute it during work hours or anything. I thought, does the dad not realize what he is guilty of? Or is he just a creep to a woman from South Africa I met in college, and I were discussing how physically safe she felt in that college town after a trauma psychology class, and she casually said that she had been abducted and raped by a couple of gang members back home. I was clear. She was the first person I had met, but when I politely asked for further details, she pretended it had recently happened and said that almost no woman she had known as a child had not been sexually abused in South Africa. I live in the US, but I worked with a South African man who lived in Australia. I believe he overstayed his visa period. He casually mentioned sexual coercion, which was really validating because I had gone through the same thing and hadn't informed anyone. He was unable to leave the country since he was unable to return to my firm, which he knew about when he immigrated to Australia illegally. He added that in South Africa, 1 in 3. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Which one do I choose to be raped if we stay there?" Women get raped. He had a wife and 2 girls. He would obviously not be giving his family. He was saying that he would rather live illegally and take the chance than remain in South Africa, where something terrible would undoubtedly occur, and his girls wouldn't have. A friend of mine, who had turned into a drug dealer, informed me, as we were playing a board game, that one night someone had stolen from him, and he and his friends chased him down, which resulted in a car chase in which the other vehicle struck a bystander and left the victim paraplegic, and he felt terrible about it. He would constantly monitor news coverage about the incident, and I learned that he had passed away from alcohol poisoning around a year later. Shouldn't you be reporting this to the I will not go to the police and have them interview him, just for him to turn around and be threatening me because he believes I spoke to them, especially on such shaky proof that he stated this to me once, and I believe that at the time I simply assumed he was a pot dealer who lived in a fully paid-off property and didn't know he was in deep enough to be. I was terrified by that talk and thought, I need to get away from this guy as soon as possible before he shows up at my place in an attempt to harm or kill him because he had defrauded us in a drug trade, or requesting assistance in concealing a body or something. And at this point, I believe the real offense was when I told my grandfather that I wanted to bring my Japanese girlfriend to visit about 6 or 7 years ago. He informed me he didn't want to see her without giving it much thought. When I asked him why, he told me a vivid account of how he was a prisoner of war in a Japanese internment camp and witnessed one of his buddies being singled out at randomly and brutally assaulted by guards for amusement or stress reduction. He claims he finds it difficult to look at Asian faces because he is afraid of saying something. He regrets never expressing to me and does not feel angry of his prior wartime experiences, and I was at a loss for words, so I simply hugged him, shifted the conversation, and then informed the girlfriend that it wasn't a good idea. However, when the first Harry Potter film came out, it was in 2001. While we were sitting in the theater, my ex-boyfriend at the time revealed to me that he had a crush on Hermione Emma Watson. She was 10 years old, and he was 25. I was quite taken aback by his casual remark, his having feelings for a child, but a few years later, it was revealed that he had abused a little girl from the family that had taken him in when his mother had expelled him. He was 16, And she was, I believe, 10. I answered. At least tell me she was married into the family. To which my boss's husband responded, no, she's not. He was bringing up the fact that he had his aunt when he was 19 in a boast about how much money he had when he was younger. Not a home wrecker. When he was 15, my boss, who was a complete jerk, boasted about having lost his virginity to his mother's attractive acquaintance. He also mentioned how much money he received at the time. When he was younger, he attempted to get a 20-something co-worker to pay him to take his 14-year-old son out on a date to give him more confidence. The man was at a teenage sleepover, and my friend told me that the church leader was staring at him. Every time he came, she was afraid she was pregnant. We had just been discussing Take That versus Backstreet Boys when we were 13 years old, and she had written an essay about it for our class that same week. Our teacher had a complete breakdown, but she phoned her parents to assist in guiding the conversation and ensure they trusted their daughter and would be doing what she was supposed to do, making it plain that none of it was on the girl. E's father took a brief stroll to their once reliable relatives after calling the police and social services to get the girl into specialized treatment. My stepfather said he saw the preacher at his friend's apartment, and I heard the police arrived, but no one was taken into custody that night. Rural Norway regulations state that if you leave now, I won't have to complete any paperwork, so don't force me to return. Dragging myself around on crutches, and my mother simply remarked, good. Many churchgoers, of course, concluded that the 13-year-old had wooed the big adult in a court case and was only a my friend. Never really healed despite her best efforts and inpatient treatment for her anorexia and self-harm. The court didn't buy it for a second, and the nice man ended up going to jail. Traits she formed as a result of the stress, and even as an adult. You can see that she always carries a burden with her. I love you, sweetie, and I'm so sorry that Wicked Peace took so much from you. From you. There was this guy I occasionally hung out with for maybe 6 months before we simply stopped seeing each other. My wife and I got along well with him and his family, but we didn't click. I let him in and ask how he's been, and he tells me that he's been stressed out since his wife had an injury. A few years later, he shows up just to chat with a friendly face. I've had difficult moments before. He thought it was a good idea to text his 12-year-old stepdaughter and her 13-year-old friend about it, laying everything out as if he had done it from his point of view. He found love elsewhere to heal the injury, which was rare, but they were swinging a view, and ends by saying, I told her that she couldn't buy a new movie, so she stole my phone and sent all these texts to her and her friends' phones to get back at me. Next, he says he's accepting the plea deal and going to even he didn't believe it when he said that his stepdaughter set him up. We relocated before he was released 5 years later. We don't say anything even remotely encouraging, and he simply disappears. He's currently on a register for life. It wasn't the only reason, but it raised the possibility that we shouldn't continue living here in 5 years. What do you mean when you say that even he didn't believe it? Did he tell you his cover story before acknowledging that it was? I'm not sure what the truth was, even if it were true, and he was set up. He knew that no judge or jury would ever believe it. Years after she was able to stop using crack, a friend of mine who was in recovery once said that she sold her friend, gave a few guys permission to do anything they wanted with her in exchange for some crack, but her friend was too drunk to consent. The way it was communicated was so casually funny and regretful. I know people make mistakes, up things when they're addicted, and I understand that. But the lack of regret or guilt affected me so much that I was never able to see her the same way again. If she explained what I've been troubled by the story for years, it's indescribable how horrible that is to do to someone. Reading that made me furious. Believe me, I felt the same way when it happened. I never imagined that I would hear nearly the same tale again. But here I am at the age of 13, hanging out at my friend's house, where everyone was an active meth addict, including the drug dealer who lived there. We were all sitting in the living room, chatting about the bizarre things that had happened, when one of his frequent customers, who was probably around 17 or 18, broke down in tears, telling everyone, almost proudly, that she had asked her buddy to stay with her at a motel and left her there alone, telling her she was going to obtain more drugs. She then gave the room's key to a few men and said how much meth she had received for doing that. But I can't remember. She did indicate that when the guys left, she returned to the room and did anything they wanted with her friend, in exchange for some amphetamines, smoked out her friend, and after discussing it with my friend later that evening, we decided to avoid her company as much as possible and to never leave each other alone with her. I was already aware that she was insane, but that story was really scary. Shortly after my sister and I were born, my grandmother married a man who was over 20 years younger than her, about 4 or 5 months after our mother checked us into a mental health facility. When we were around 2 years old, my sister developed what my grandmother believed to be a urinary tract infection, and after testing, my grandmother's husband was arrested after it was found that she had gonorrhea. Almost 20 years have gone by, and despite her divorce, she has stayed with this man, friends with his 2 sisters, the youngest of whom is around 15 years old and her brother's junior. The sisters are there at our 4th of July celebration, and they are informing my grandma that her ex has been after being freed from prison and placed in a facility for sexual offenders. The oldest sister lays out the shocking information. Since it didn't stop him the first time and won't stop him this time, we all just stare at her in disbelief. What do you think? He was discharged from a mental hospital the last time, supposedly right before he married my grandma, for diddling his youngest sister. The whole family knew he was a pedo and simply kept it to themselves since they had believed that the institutionalization would have healed him. After his first act, which he had committed when he was still officially a minor, 17 years old. But they just don't bring up any of this for a long time. Decades, while also continuing to be close companions of my family, which was devastated by the act. Naturally, we all lost contact with you. You missed the crucial part, you know. Tell me how your mother is doing. How is mine? Still institutionalized, and most likely, this condition will undoubtedly persist. Didn't improve her emotional state. She promised to keep her safe. Children due to her paranoid behavior and deluded hallucination. That she abandoned children with individuals she fully believes me. What a terrible predicament. I hope everything is good with you and your sister. Currently, my sister and I are both happy, married with her own 2 kids. Fortunately, she was sufficiently young at the time. Regarding the attack, she has no memory of the actual event.